Welcome, my name is Matt Wilson, and thank you for joining us for episode 53 of the Fire Dog Podcast. In this episode, Chris and I have the privilege of speaking with Master Gunnery Sergeant Marcos Martinez. Master Gunnery Sergeant Marcos Martinez serves as Fire Protection Training Analyst with Marine Corps Training and Education Command in Quantico, Virginia. Over his 28-year career in the Marine Corps, he's served with an urban search and rescue team as a drill instructor and completed a tour in Iraq during the Battle of Ramadi. Currently, he is the Senior Enlisted Leader for Marine Corps Fire Protection. In this episode, Chris and I talk with Master Guns Martinez about his service, the mission and structure of Marine Corps Fire Protection, and how it compares to the Air Force, among other topics. It is my pleasure to welcome Master Gunnery Sergeant Marcos Martinez. Well, without further ado, let's get into it. Marcos, man, I appreciate you joining us. Look forward to hearing your perspectives, what life's like as a firefighter in the Marine Corps. But before we get into all of our talking points, just tell us a little bit about yourself. When did you join? Where are you from? How long have you been in the Marine Corps? And whatever else you'd like to share.
All right, so I'm from a small town in Southern California in the desert. Name of the town is Hopeville, California. It's a small agricultural town, not much to do there. Just couldn't wait to get out of that place, so I saw the opportunity to join the Marine Corps was going to be the thing to do. It took me 3 times to pass the ASVAB. I'm not a very bright guy. I wasn't a good student at all. And when I did that, I just wanted to be a Marine. Didn't care what job I got. And I was lucky enough that, I went open contract and I was lucky enough to get the MOS of a 7051 aircraft rescue firefighter. And the rest is history. Went to boot camp night in January of '97. So I just hit my 28-year mark recently. First, after I went to the academy, first tour was a 1-year tour in Japan, Iwakuni, Japan. After that, went to Miramar, was there in Miramar, San Diego for roughly 9 months. And an opportunity, was brought to us at evening muster, like, hey, who wants to go to this new unit that's being stood up called CBIRF, Chemical Biological Incident Response Force. It's like, oh, that's interesting. So I raised my hand. I wanted to be high speed, right? At the time, you're young, you just want to go do cool stuff. So I did that, right? Got on the road 2 weeks later because orders hit like immediately. Drove cross country to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. Was there for a year. We were only there for a year. I said we because I was one of the first 15 firefighters to show up to that unit, and our responsibility was to conduct urban search and rescue. Right, so when we arrived a couple months later, we went up to New York City. We trained at Randall's Island with FDNY, Special Operations folks up there. So that was our introduction to urban search and rescue. So we did that for the remainder of 2 years. So the first year we were in Camp Lejeune, and then the Marine Corps decided to move us closer to the National Capital Region. We ended up in Indian Head, Maryland. All right, so if you do the math, my first 4 years in the Marine Corps was pretty awesome, right? I went Japan, West Coast, East Coast, and then National Capital Region. I was having a blast, and doing the urban search and rescue stuff. I don't know if you guys have done that before, but what else can you ask for? We're climbing stuff, we're jumping off buildings, we're breaking stuff, we're moving stuff. It was a really good time, and we were really good at our jobs. So I decided to re-enlist, and I re-enlisted to get orders to be a drill instructor in San Diego. So I left that unit, went cross country to go to San Diego from Maryland. I was on leave to go check into DI school, and that's when September 11th happened. Right, so automatically, imagine this. It was early in the morning on I believe it was a Monday morning, and TV. My mom turns the TV on. She wakes me up, and she's like, "Hey, something's happening in New York City." And I turn the TV on, and I see, the first tower had just hit the World Trade Center, and I'm thinking, oh my God, like in my mind, like I know guys that were there because they were the folks that trained us, and I know exactly what's happening on the ground. And then the second plane hit, and those emotions start, the anger, the frightened emotions, et cetera, and then you see the buildings collapsing. I just remember thinking to myself, like, oh my God, like this is it. This is what we've been training for 2 years, and I can't be there, right? So it was really frustrating. Immediately, I got on the phone, talked to my buddies, because they were getting spun up to roll up to New York City or even the Capitol or the Pentagon, right? Because the plane also hit the Pentagon. So it was really frustrating sitting on the sidelines after 2 years of doing a lot of intense training. And then I was a rescue team leader too. So automatically, right, I'm thinking about my guys like, holy crap. Come to find out, right, they didn't spin up the unit, they didn't deploy because, like I said, it's a chemical, biological instant response force. They didn't want to use that capability just yet because we just didn't know what was happening at the time. But anyhow, that was me going on leave to go to check into drill instructor school. Went to drill instructor school, did 3.5 years as a drill instructor in San Diego. You're training this whole generation of Marines to go to war because Iraq kicked off and it was nice. It was hot and heavy. It's like, well, I got to go do that because originally my plan was not, like everybody else, do 4 years and get out. But then I became a drill instructor. The war kicked off. Well, I got to go do that now. Put my money where my mouth is. Requested first deploying unit. Just so happened to be Yuma, Arizona, 45 minutes from where I grew up, right? And I wanted to travel and adventure, but they sent me back to the desert. Did the Iraq tour, got back, and was in Ramadi for first 3 months. Then El Taqaddum for the follow-on 3 months. Performed, all the things fire department, firefighting that we trained for. Both on a station and off station. We can get into that later too, if you like. Once I was done with Iraq, went back to Yuma, and then I decided, well, what's next, right? Because the war was in Iraq was dialing down. It's like, well, hey, I want to go do drill instructor duty again because I felt I really did well. So I volunteered one more time, but this time it was to go train naval officers right through their initial pipeline. So got orders. I requested it. I got it. And that was in Newport, Rhode Island. And I moved in March, and I was not ready from the desert, fairly nice weather, to frigid cold up in New England. That was a shocker to the system. Anyhow, did that for another 3 years and like 3 months. And again, Afghanistan was kicking off, call the detailer or the monitor is what we call them. It's like, hey, next deploying unit. It's like, oh, perfect. I got just the unit for you, Yuma, Arizona. So I go cross country one more time. And, but that was a silver lining there. I got to go to, Afghanistan, did that deployment. And then, got back to Yuma. And then, after that deployment, got selected to Master Sergeant, and then I got to go overseas to Japan again, Iwakuni, Japan, right where I started. So that was really cool to go as a young Marine and then go back out there with my family. Did a 3-year gig out there, and then Miramar again after that. Spent about a year and a half at the fire department on the airfield, I should say, the ARF station, and then some headquarters spots. Got selected to Master Gunnery Sergeant, and then up to headquarters of Marine Corps is where we mostly end up. So I've been here roughly 3.5 years, and I'm a training analyst for Training and Education Command. So under my umbrella, all things training in our MOS is what I'm responsible for, right? From we're going to get into integration and the WTI, bringing the Air Force firefighters in. We just recently had our readiness review for our community in Texas at Goodfellow Air Force Base at the Academy. A lot of goodness came out of that. So finding training gaps that we have in our community and trying to fill those gaps in any way that I can. And training touches so many things. So it's been a real cool adventure to just start, kicking over rocks, such as FRAS, right? I listened to your podcast when you talked about FRAS, gave you guys a call, and boom, we were in there. And now we have a FRAS, United States Marine Corps FRAS course down at Camp Lejeune. So kudos to your efforts on that. That's really awesome. So I got 2 more years left. I can only do 30 years in the Marine Corps, and it's going to be bittersweet. I just don't know what I'm going to do when I grow up anymore, so I'll figure that out as it comes.
Well, Marcos, that's quite the career. I didn't realize you've been in 28 years, man. That's impressive. 1997. The fact that you've stuck around in the Marine Corps that long, through Iraq, Afghanistan, all the PCSs, it's impressive, man. Hats off to you. Guys, there's so many things I'd like to dig into as you were talking about it. You're talking about Ramadi and things you did for urban search and rescue. I was wondering for that, was that a part of a task force, like a FEMA task force? I mean, I guess that's probably pre FEMA task force. I mean, FEMA and the Department of Homeland Security kind of stood up post 9/11, so maybe that was before all of that.
So, yes, that was before the task force, or before Homeland Security. But when I was in Maryland, we did reach out to one of the FEMA teams here in Fairfax, and that was an
Yeah,
eye
Task
opening.
Force One, Virginia Task Force One, I believe.
Yeah, I think so. It's been so long. But yeah, I mean, back then communication was not great like it is now. I couldn't just
Right.
Google it on my phone. I didn't even know how to use a computer back then, to be quite honest with you. So me and another sergeant, we just jumped in one of our vehicles and like, hey, let's go find this task force that's urban search and rescue and ask them if they want to train with us. So that's what we did. We just jumped on a vehicle, drove into Fairfax. We had an address. Yeah, you follow the street signs or whatever. I think it was a Yahoo Maps back then. And we
MapQuest,
just
you
knocked.
printed it out.
Yeah, exactly. We just knocked on their door and said, "Hey, we're Marines. This is what we do. We want to see what you guys have, and open up the possibilities for training." And they welcomed us with open arms. We got to see how they have their pack out and the things they do, in a very fast, rapid time frame to get out the door and deploy anywhere around the world. And at that moment, at that time at our unit, we were still trying to figure it out, and it's like boom, right in front of us. So that was a really cool experience. I had to leave shortly thereafter for drill instructor school, but yeah, that was that experience.
Yeah. I had the fortunate experience to be taught by some of those Virginia Task Force guys, and just, I mean, the best of the best. Just really, what it takes to be in a task force, a FEMA task force, is I don't know that people realize the amount of experience and certifications. It's just they don't just pick anybody. Those guys are incredibly knowledgeable with what they do. They taught me. I was in a class for structural collapse. Probably not quite to the level that sounds like you did for as long as you did, but just a few training classes for me, and never actual hands-on experience in executing on urban search and rescue. Although the opportunities are pretty few and far between, but man, awesome stuff.
Yeah, we also had the opportunity to go out to Oklahoma City. Guy by the name of Mike Shannon, he ran a course out there, and it was real world, right? Like he had connections with concrete companies, and they would just put slabs on top of slabs on top of slabs, and it was dangerous. It was the real deal. Like you couldn't mess this up, or it's going to be catastrophic, right? It was a little wild west. It's Oklahoma, right? So the rules are a little different there. So that was a real deal. I call it, the USAR boot camp back then, because I mean, you got on deck, like we set up a tent, we slept in that tent, and we went into 12-hour shifts, and that was really neat. So we were really good at our job at that time, and that was the only thing we needed to do is be prepared to do urban search and rescue operations. And our typical week was, Monday you check your gear, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday we went out to our training area, and then Friday we cleaned it up and rinse and repeat. And then sprinkle in all the Marine Corps requirements, rifle range, PFT, CFTs, any administrative things. But it was a great time. We were
Yeah,
really,
but as a PFC, I mean, or whatever the rank was at the time, I mean that, like, what more could you ask for? You know what I
it
mean?
was,
Like, gosh, yeah, you're right about that. I mean, a year in Japan and then going right into that, man. I feel like you got pretty lucky with that opportunity.
oh, absolutely
Yeah.
super lucky.
That's how they get you. They hook you early, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, they got him 28 years later, man. Look at
yeah.
him.
Yep. Hey, tell us real quick, with your role at headquarters, the Air Force firefighters listening are going to be familiar with, our Air Force fire chief. We've got a career field manager. Are there similar roles for Marine Corps fire protection?
Yes, so we're kind of spread out. So we have a what we call Ockfield SME. He is at one of our headquarter units, right, and he controls. He's the ultimate decision where people go, working with manpower. He connects the dots with all things acquisition, et cetera, right? I would say that he has a lot of the responsibilities that the team down in Tyndall Air Force Base have, right? So if you take the four master gunnery sergeants up at the headquarters Marine Corps level, we all have the responsibilities of what all your team members down at Tyndall have, right? So their career field manager is what our op-field SME is, right? And that's at a different headquarters unit. Me, as a training analyst, I work with Alton Robinson with our FES, our certification process, our CDCs. And he's given me the keys to the castle. Like, hey, Alton, can I manage the practicals and making sure we're doing those assessments properly? And I went to a couple with him. He told me exactly what they look for. So we've been doing that. We have regional fire chiefs at our 3 locations: Japan, West Coast, East Coast, and we do our best to try to get out there and go ahead and inspect or do the quality checks for the CDCs. That amongst other things under my umbrella, like I said. But that's what we do up at headquarters of Marine Corps for our fire service.
Let's. I want to kind of dig deeper into that, the kind of the mission and the structure of Marine Corps fire protection. Will you kind of talk to us about the Marine wing support versus installation and kind of that construct?
Okay, yep. So I will start with installations. So at the installation of I would say the Marine Corps air stations, right? That's where we reside as firefighters, at the airfield in the ARF department, right? And we don't have enough people. Like, manning's been an issue for a very long time, right? We require 43 firefighters to execute the mission there on the airfield, and those are shifts. And then you got your administrative support folks also. So then you have the MWSSs. So let me back up. And that's only the ARF mission, period. Then we have our MWSSs, right? So when Marine Wing Support Squadron, when we deploy forward, we are there to support the aircraft, right? And that entire squadron is very similar to your, I want to say, your combat wing.
Deployable combat wing is what they're
Correct.
calling it. It's
Right.
Air Task Force and eventually deployable combat wing.
Correct, where you have all the infrastructure for essentially a base to function and operate, right? So that's what the MWSS does. We lost the mission to, or we did not, after one of the products of force design was that we will no longer, as an MWSS, be responsible for the base camp. It used to be that way, but now we are just responsible for everything that happens on the airfield, and that's where we come in, right? Marine firefighters. We are the ARF. We are also responsible for those hangar spaces, the inspections, and anything that happens, a fire or a first aid or a EMS call. Like, we're responsible for those things. And then also the hazmat operations level of the mission, right? Because we have a lot of hazmat on the airfields. So that's what we do at a deployable unit. And then, everything else that entire MWSS has. We have engineers. We have our expeditionary airfield guys. So your MOS guys with the arresting gear, they do that. They light, and they also mark the airfield. And if we have to go make LZs, they're also a part of that. And then, of course, your communicators, your motor T folks to move stuff around, your sweeper guys, you name it. Everything that it takes to operate an airfield is within that MWSS.
Yeah, the focus is airfield in the Marine Corps, it seems, with the Marines. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, they civilians work anything else, any base support or like in garrison base support, right? As far as the fire department is concerned.
Correct. There's a little bit of connective tissue there,
And
right?
there's opportunities for Marines to go and do, a 6 month, 1 year, a couple year tour, right, alongside those civilians to get some experience. Is that right? At some locations.
So some locations, correct. There's a couple of MOAs, MOUs throughout the Marine Corps where we'll send one Marine over to the fire department to ride on their vehicles, but we lose a person, right? So it depends on manpower, right? And it also depends how many Marines from the MWSS, when they're not deployed, go over and through the Fleet Assistance Program, the FAP program, to integrate or to help out with the manpower at the installation, right? So no matter where you're at, whether you're at an MWSS or an installation, we're ultimately responsible for combat readiness.
Sure.
Either you're at the installation supporting sortie generation and increasing pilot readiness, or you're at the MWSS where you're preparing to deploy at locations like in 29 Palms or overseas. They just had a group go to Civil Flag, Yuma, Arizona, etc.
Okay. For my understanding, is it? I always try to visualize these things. The MWSS. So are we saying that, let's say if on the airfield side of 29 Palms, I don't know that there is an airfield. I assume that there is.
There is.
If that unit can that unit deploy, and if they do, are you like uprooting the entire airfield side, the entire airfield fire department, and are all of them going to where you have no airfield fire protection at 29 Palms?
Yeah, so in the case of 29 Palms, there is a small detachment. It used to be an entire MWSS that was residing there, but again, Force Design made a big cut, and now there's just a small contingent of engineers, firefighters, expeditionary airfield Marines, and motor T operators, and maintainers.
Refuelers, probably.
Refuelers, exactly, yeah, there. And they are in a non-deployable unit.
Okay.
That small contingent. It's roughly 84, 85 Marines.
Okay.
They're supporting that.
And they're responsible for the airfield all the time.
Correct.
And they're active duty Marines.
Correct.
And so at what point, if I'm there, and I guess what units are getting tasked to deploy, do you have to PCS out or PCA out of that unit into a deployable unit? And what is that deployable unit doing day to day?
Okay, yep. So we have MWSS throughout the world. We have 3 East Coast, 3 at West Coast,
Okay.
and 3 overseas. Right?
And the MWSS is that deployable, like deployable combat wing equivalent, the deployable unit.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep. So whenever you're not deployed, you're back at home station. You are increasing your combat readiness, right? So they're responsible for conducting a few activities, right? One of which is FARPs, forward arming refueling points. There's BRAT, base recovery after attack, ADR, airfield damage repair,
Yeah, right.
and a lot of the similar things that you guys do on your end. Those are just some examples, right? So
And that's what they're training for. They're all of that. They're training, preparing for their cycle of deployment.
Yeah, so they can do it at home station. Sometimes they are tasked to go support exercises such as WTI, Weapons and Tactics Instruction course out in Yuma, Arizona. Sometimes they do it at SLTE, service training level exercise in 29 Palms. And sometimes they get tasked, right, to go out to the Pacific or go out to Norway. And that's where they're getting those hitting the checks in the box to show that the commander to show their commanders, their colonels, that they're ready to deploy.
Okay. So they do have opportunities to sometimes integrate into fire departments, go on responses, but their primary responsibility is to train, prepare for war, and they're assigned to that unit while they're assigned to that unit, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And how long do they stick with that unit before they move to some like maybe non-deployable unit or?
Yeah, so when you get orders to an MWSS, you're typically there for entire enlistment, 3 years minimum.
Oh, okay.
Unless they've got your one off, like, hey, we want to switch over. Say you have a Marine at the installation that wants to go do all that stuff, and maybe there's a Marine that really doesn't want to, or I can't say that. Maybe there's circumstances where it's best for the Marine to be at an installation at a non-deployable
family
unit.
dynamics, injuries.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And those are onesies and twosies. We know we'll look at everything, and then that can happen. In the past when Iraq was kicking off, you had Marines that were having kids or whatever the case may be,
Sure.
and it was an easy phone call to our monitor, like, hey, this kid at the installation wants to deploy. It's best if we just leave this one back on this go around, and we would make that switch. Yeah.
Roger.
But usually,
makes complete sense. So as you're mentioning, that MWSS, it's just like an air task force and a deployable combat wing in the Air Force. Now, this is a new concept for us. It sounds like it's not for the Marine Corps. So we're trying to figure ourselves out. We're trying to learn because in our through global war on terrorism, we've done a crowdsource kind of deployment where you are picking one or two people that are on a personnel UTC that go into AFCENT and then connect with other onesie twosies from across the United States or Indo-PACOM or USAFE or Europe, right? And they all come together. So that's how we've been doing business, right, over the past two decades. And it's worked, and it's, there's a reason that we started doing business that way in the Air Force. But now now they've realized, and credit to, General Brown, who is our Chief of Staff of the Air Force, and now he's the Chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Brown. He, a few years ago, back in 2018, so more than a few years ago, 2019 or so, he wanted to have combat, or what are they called? The Army Combat Brigade, or the Naval Carrier Strike Group equivalent of the Air Force. We didn't have that, right? And so really we were being nickeled and dimed and supporting all of these. The Air Force was just overworked and overused. He wanted to have a unit of action that was equivalent to those others, to the sister services, so that it made sense, so that we looked like, and we made sense to the chairman and the Joint Chiefs, or the Joint Chiefs of Staff, right? Like when you need to go to war and you need an Air Force unit of action, like you would need an Army unit of action, like I just go and grab an Air Task Force, a deployable combat wing, and they go and do war, right? They do what you need to do. And so anyways, we're in that transition period, right? And that idea kind of started, it was an idea back as far back as, World War II, and up until the 1980s, and then we went away from it through the 90s. But now we are going through our transition period, trying to kind of relearn how to do business. And so just a little bit of context, and I always like to use this as a teaching moment too for any listeners too, like, because it's hard for me to even to understand and conceptualize too, and so I like to say it out loud to try to help myself and some others understand it. So that's what an Air Task Force is. And then so what we're going to do is, right now, and there's a handful of Air Task Force established and stood up throughout the United States, 4, 5, or 6, and they are taking from like 4 different bases, 4 different installations, or where they're taking people from. And the idea is that they join up periodically to train, and then when their time comes to deploy, which the first ATF is supposed to deploy this fall, October, then they get up and go together, right? Eventually, our deployable combat wing is going to look like your MWSS, where it's all of that deployable combat wing in one geographic location for 2-3 years, kind of like how you explained. And when it's their time to go, and their entire purpose in life is to train for deployment and not to support in garrison operations, although they can do that simultaneously. But their primary responsibility is to be ready for that deployment, and then they pick up and go. So anyways, just a little bit of a history, and maybe you understood that, but
Yes,
or you already knew about that.
that's the way we do it now. When
That's
we're
great.
back at home station, we FAP our folks that are. We only keep a small contingent at the MWSS for equipment readiness and some of the training readiness
Right.
things, but then everyone else goes to the station to help out there.
Roger.
And then when the balloon goes up or there's an exercise, they punch out. Yeah.
Well, it's
And
good to. I feel like it's good to be on a similar sheet of music. So go ahead, Chris.
So tell us, so on deployment, kind of another transition the Air Force is going through is thinking in the whole hub and spoke model, where, like Matt said, we're used to plopping down, in a location and setting up a fire department with, 70 firefighters maybe, and we're learning that we've got to, pivot to more of a decentralized command maneuver warfare type model. Am I correct in understanding that's not really a new thing for the Marine Corps, thinking in a hub and spoke deployment model for firefighters?
Correct. So we did that in Iraq, and we also did that in Afghanistan, because we had our let's see, I'll use Iraq for example. Our big bases were El Taqadum and Al Assad, right? So East Coast units would go to Al Assad, West Coast units would go to TQ for short. And then from there, we had our other outlying sites, right? So when I was in Iraq, our headquarters was at TQ with our bigger contingent of Marines. And then we had 3 other locations. We had Ramadi, Fallujah, and KCV, Korean Village, something. KV is what we called it. And those are all small contingents. So, for example, on Ramadi, where I was at, I only had 9 firefighters. We ran 24-hour operations for 3 LZs at the time. And if anything were to happen out in town where they needed some fire suppression, then we would roll outside the wire with detachments of security, etc. and we were tired, right? Anytime we were never off shift, there was no shift. That wasn't a thing. We were always on call, right? So if aircraft were going to land, we were there to watch them land and take off safely. When there's something that happened at the flight aid or the aid station there at medical, run by Charlie Med on the Army side, then we were there to help them out because they were also low on manpower, right? We have those medical skills that would help them out. So we were doing things outside of the box that we wouldn't normally do. We're pushing IVs, doing blood draws, litter carries, triage, right? When somebody would, ram a V-bid into a public bazaar, right? And that causes a lot of carnage, and all of those victims would be brought to the aid station, and we would just go to work helping those folks out. So that was Ramadi in Iraq, right? So we were already dispersed in small teams to support airfield operations. Fast forward to Afghanistan, same thing. We were dispersed throughout the area of operations. So it's nothing new, right? To answer your question, it's nothing new. We just have now we don't have the luxury of roads. When we're talking out in the Pacific, distributed operations. So the Marine Corps is still trying to figure out how we're going to crack that nut, and how we're going to be able to maneuver on our own without depending on the C-17s or the C-5s that the Air Force was helping us use.
C-130s even.
Yeah, so we only have so many C-130s, right? So then it becomes a priority of the task force commander out there.
Marcos, I'd like to dive into some of the equipment. So you were mentioning, like, if there was a fire need out, in Ramadi, if something was on fire, you had a contingent of 7 firefighters. What does that look like with equipment?
Yep. So we had in Ramadi specifically, we had a P-19, one P-19.
Mm-hmm.
We had a rescue vehicle it was just a Humvee, and we kind of went to work and made it work for ourselves, right?
So you just use firefighter skills as Marines, really. If it were extrication and then medical treatment.
Correct. Yep. And we played a pickup game, right? What I mean by that, so I did half of my tour in Ramadi and half of my tour in TQ, and we were also helping with like a fly out, fly away type rescue capability. So we would get with Dust Off, which is the Black Hawk medevac squadron. If they needed our help to do whatever, then they would call us, and it happened one time, right? So with us, we got it was around 1100, or sorry, 2300 one night. Got a bang on the door like, hey, we got to go. And me and 3 other Marines, we jumped in a Black Hawk. We took a Stokes basket with like our small kit of equipment, right, to be able to get somebody out of a vehicle. Jumped in the Black Hawk, went out and went to work, right? Luckily, by the time we got there, because it was an IED that blew up a Humvee. Sorry, I should have started out with that. Humvee Marine was trapped. We got the call. We flew out, and then luckily they pulled him out by the time we got there. Loaded that Marine up in the helicopter, flew him back to the air base, and then we put him in medical, and we went back to our little huts. And that was quite the experience, right? Because you go from like almost falling asleep to boom, you're in action, just like any firefighter.
Sure.
And we get back to our hooches, and it's just like, wow, what just happened? And it seemed like a dream the next night we woke up, right? Because we're fully kitted up with our rounds and our sidearms, and we're going to go do some good work. Yeah, so
it sounds a lot like so Air Force had what we called RAMS teams, and maybe Chris knows the acronym. I don't. I can't think of it off the top of my head. RAMS. It's kind of exactly what you explained, outside the wire, rapid extrication capabilities. So Humvee rollover, or something of that nature. Sometimes the firefighters would work alongside Air Force pararescuemen, because pararescuemen are our capability in the Air Force for exactly what you kind of explained, like outside the wire, advanced medical treatment and extrication. And their purpose in life is really to go and treat and save down pilots, really, as the origin of what a pararescueman is for. But in GWAT and Afghanistan and Iraq, we worked alongside them, and because we have medical treatment capability and training. So but anyways, what you explained sounds like a RAMS team. I wonder, you said you're kitted up. In Iraq and Afghanistan, did your Marine firefighters have ensemble? did they bring along firefighter structural ensemble or proximity gear,
I
SCBAs?
believe, yeah, I believe we had like one set, and it was just the proxy gear in a
So
bag.
if you wanted to send one guy into an IDLH or in a hot environment, then he would
Correct.
doff all of his IPE, maybe put on ensemble and take care of business.
Correct. Yeah. It
Interesting.
was very minimal, like anything we could carry in a Stokes basket, right? Because we also have our packs with,
Sure.
hey, in case the helicopter had to leave us in place and we had to go back with the convoy or continue with their mission. That was
Sure.
also part of our contingency plan.
Because I mean, again, we're going through this transition where we're trying to understand how to have these distributed operations, right, with a minimal logistical footprint. And when you start adding in firefighter ensemble, SCBA, I mean, things get complicated. And then, the airmen and the Marines are wearing IPE, helmets, vests, carrying whatever, potentially weapons. How do you put on structural ensemble
Yeah.
or
It's
protective ensemble with that stuff? You really can't unless you
yeah,
take everything
well,
off.
yeah, well, in Iraq, what we did is going into Iraq, we were told like, hey, if you're gonna bring gear, bring oversized gear, like buy oversized stuff that fits over
Interesting.
all your PPE, and that's what we did.
Yeah, we're not even talking about JS list.
No.
I don't know if you guys had to carry that. I don't think there was much of a threat. I mean, you
Like
would know
the
better than
chemical
I.
chem
Right.
bio stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I know when we initially invaded Iraq in 2003, I know that some of those units were actually wearing. They were in MOP 1 as they were kind of moving into Iraq.
Hmm.
But anyways, yeah, just a whole lot of things to consider. And
It's
gosh,
priorities.
there's so much to dive into there. Um,
I would say, out of all that, what I learned is, yeah, we have our specialty, and I think you guys are going in the right direction, right? Where you're ready to do many things, right? Capable, agile airmen is that I think what you call it. Um, we can't just be
Right,
rolling.
multi-craft, right? Because there's fewer people, so a lighter or a smaller logistical footprint, and also a lighter or smaller manpower footprint. And so, yeah, you have to be able to do multiple crafts. And the Marines I was talking to last week, those at K Bay, and when we were in Hawaii, they were mentioning to me that the way that it's constructed now is that our version of agile combat employment at the furthest point of our fight is what we call a spoke or a contingency location, which is even further out, where we could have as few as 3 firefighters. And
Yep.
the equivalent in the Marine Corps, from my understanding, is those firefighters supporting a FARP,
Correct.
a forward armament refueling point. And their primary responsibility there, of course, they're firefighters and they know firefighting, but their primary responsibility or the primary mission of the Marine Corps at that place is refueling.
Correct.
And so they know refueling, and they bring refueling bladder with them, and they create refueling points. And right now, I think you guys are going through. You're trying to develop or see, understand or figure out what the ARF capability looks like. And right now, it's a halon extinguisher. Am I correct in saying that?
Correct.
Right. And so that we're kind of collaborating at the higher levels of Air Force fire protection, Marine Corps fire protection, like what does it look like? And the Marine Corps is like, how do we do what you guys are trying to do? Because we're trying to incorporate a Polaris dagger. We are going to incorporate what the Polaris dagger and putting on like 150 gallon, 95 gallon per minute pump, some kind of capability. And you guys just you can't do that because the airlift capability that we have isn't what you have.
Correct. So what we are getting after that issue, right? So we're currently so the current vehicle we have is the P-19R, right? And it takes a C-130 to move that, or sorry, a C-17 to move that thing.
Yeah, the thing
That
is
would be
massive.
Yeah, so that would be at your bigger locations, right?
And
We
just for the
have,
listeners who, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Marcus, but I just want to hit this P-19R. This isn't what we understand as a P-19 of the Air Force. This thing is like tailor-made for the Marine Corps. It's just this giant olive drab ARF apparatus, right? And it doesn't. I'm not sure what the manufacturer is, but it doesn't really look like a P-19 that we understand in the Air Force, right? This thing is
correct.
huge. And it takes more than a C-130 to move it, right?
Correct. Yeah, and if it was developed during post Iraq and then through the Afghanistan phase, and it'd be perfect if we were still in a land battle like then, right? We just didn't know what we didn't know. Fast forward now, we realize we need to be self-sufficient, and our platform to do that on is a C-130, right? So we have a requirements document that's been approved, right? We're approved to go after the P-19, or no, I'm sorry, a C-130 transportable ARF apparatus, right? It can be a P-19 Charlie, as the Air Force has, or something else, right? It just has to be C-130 transportable and have the ARF capabilities.
Gotcha.
We just have to go fight for money, right? So we have folks that are doing that and going through that, busting through that red tape to get those funds locked in. And now we are going to go after our RIS, our Rapid Intervention System, right? We have to go after capability, right? We can't fall in love with the thing, the dagger or the Mark One, correct?
That's what we gave. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a little history there.
Right. So you have to tell them, hey, we want it to be. It has to be MV-22 transportable because
Sure.
that's our smallest platform. It has to be taken that way. It's got to, then we have to put all the parameters, the thresholds that we expect it to perform in off-road. If we want to say, we can use Q factors and put those into our requirements, etc. But that's going to be, we still have to put pen to paper. We have a pretty decent product right now, but we just need to refine it. There's more to follow on that.
Okay.
But we don't know if it's going to be a trailer that can be pulled by a prime mover, ULTV, because we also have that limitation that the Commandant said you can only use these two prime movers, which are ULTVs. And the space available in an Osprey. So again, it might be something similar to the Dagger that has something in the back of this ULTV, or it might be a trailer. We just don't know yet.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, you guys are kind of still trying to figure it out too. And
We got thumbs up from Chief Wilson. Hey, if you see a Dagger, jump on it and you can use it. So we'll see what that happens.
shit, yeah, man. Yeah, we want to practice. If you guys want to use it, cool. Yeah, we love the idea of working with Marines because, again, I mean, as you've kind of alluded to throughout this, it's what the Marine Corps firefighters do, in a contingency is just, I mean, it's just almost exactly the same as what is how we're conceptualizing it as in our agile combat employment scheme of maneuver. I mean, it's all about the aircraft and saving the people and having a smaller logistical footprint and, getting them refueled and off the ground. So, I mean, we're doing the same thing kind of in a, just two different services doing the same thing. So the more that we can integrate and practice together, I think the better. I mean, the potential exists probably to be in similar locations, so.
Even apart from deployment models, it seems like Air Force and Marine Corps firefighters are becoming more and more integrated.
Yeah.
We've got Marine firefighters attending our Air Force Institute of Technology courses at Wright Pat, AFIT. You mentioned earlier the Marine Corps stood up a firefighter rescue and survival course at Camp Lejeune, working side by side with Air Force firefighters. Has this been an intentional effort by, Air Force and Marine Corps leadership from your perspective?
Yeah, so we've been going real hard in trying to integrate more, right? But this has been happening for decades, right? I've talked to some guys that were in the early 90s, maybe even to the 80s, where we were sending firefighters over to Kadena and vice versa, right? They would send airmen over to Okinawa, to Fatema to train. When I was in Japan, I made an intentional, strong effort to integrate with the Air Force. First experience was with down at Anderson Air Force Base in Guam. We did the same thing with Yokota. And they would continue to do it there in Kadena and Okinawa. But I was like, man, this works. Oh, and we also did it in Osan, right? I was like, man, this thing works. We could learn so much from the lessons that we're learning from the Air Force. In fact, we stole a lot of your stuff and slapped Marine Corps on it and put some Marine Corps-isms, right? So like station captain checklists, AC checklist, all that stuff is we took from the Air Force and we've applied it, and we've seen the results the last few years of going through that checklist. In fact, we're going to institute a rookie book just like you guys have now. That's all hot off the press. You heard it here first. We just decided to do that this last week.
A little history with that, man. That started the idea, which rookie book is not a new idea. I know I've seen a bunch of different versions of it, it's but back in 2015, I was stationed at Joint Base Elmendorf Richardson in Anchorage, Alaska, and that's an idea that that we decided to move forward with up there. And the current version of the rookie book is something I actually kind of put together in 2015. So it's kind of crazy how this kind of I just hearing you say that, I'm just like, that's just wild to me, you know.
Come full circle. So back to the original question. Now at the headquarters, Marine Corps level, and Air Force headquarters, yes, absolutely, it's been an intentional effort to try to integrate more. Right, talking with Wink in the past, Chief Wilson or Chief Winkleman, and now Chief Wilson, they're totally on board, right? And this thing is just gonna be. We're gonna do much more of it this year. Last year we just kind of peeked, on the other side of the door, and this year we're gonna kick it open, right? We got a few examples of that. The first being here come next month, we're going to have Air Force firefighters, a total of 19, right, that are coming from all over the world. UK's in there. I think Alaska's sending some also. But they're going to integrate into our MWSS that's going to be supporting WTI in Yuma, Arizona, right? There's going to be 8 Air Force firefighters on the front end, and then 8 firefighters on the back end, right? So there'll be a little bit of a crossover there. So we're going to maximize the amount of folks that we're going to send through there to integrate, right? And there's going to be a lot of good lessons learned from that. And you're going to learn, those airmen are going to learn how to operate in austere environments alone and unafraid, right? I think the only parameter that we're gonna make sure that happens is they just can't drive the P19R, right? Because that's safety. Other than that, we're going to put them in all these different locations to conduct ARF operations, whether it's on a small airfield or if it's at a FARP or even on a trap mission, right? So tactical recovery of aircraft and personnel. There's a scenario that they're going to go through out there in the desert. They might not actually execute it as an enabler, but they'll just be in the aircraft that fly out to observe, right? Because that's something that you guys might want be able to do with the RAM teams, right? Is what you're saying with the PJs. So those are the things that are going to be exercised this next WTI, and we're super excited about it, right? It also helps our manpower because there's just not enough of us, right? In order to support this thing. So we're helping each other out in this process. So we're gonna kick the door in for that. That same unit out of Yuma is also going to support service level training exercise in a few months after that. I believe it's in June out at 29 Palms, right? So you heard it here first. We're also looking to, depending on how it goes, and I feel confident that this first iteration at WTI is going to be very fruitful. And then in June, we're looking to do it again, but same unit, but different airmen out at 29 Palms, same type of concept. And then again, WTI in September, and then an SLTE later in the year also. So there'll be 4 opportunities per year for fire chiefs and senior leadership to send their airmen out to the desert to chew on some dirt and rejoice in some suck.
That's what we need.
Yeah.
So we're good at, I'd like to think that we're good at firefighting, but what we're not experienced in, and consequently not good at, are field operations. Mm-hmm. It's not something that we do, like the Marine Corps does or the Army does, right? So like go sleeping on the ground in the dirt, it's not something there. I mean, we're used to the Marriott, you know what I mean, the Hilton. So and I've done it, so that's going to be invaluable experience for our airmen.
Yeah, and then you stack up, like Chris was saying, you stack up FRAS, you stack up the AFIT courses, and just recently we sent a contingent of Marines out to Silver Flag, right? So hopefully that spreads on our end to integrate with your guys during these training exercises. I've also arranged it with nothing solid yet, but with the Air National Guard, right? They're going to go out to Italy sometime in June, so maybe we can send a Marine with one of those Air National Guard units out there to support the fire department out there in I believe it's Aviano. So more to follow on that. We're getting it for both ends.
Excellent.
And it is an individual effort. Yeah.
Some of the guys in the fire department I'm in now, we're in that Silver Flag course with those Marines over there at Guam. So yeah, they had nothing but great things to say, man. What a great experience to integrate.
Awesome.
So loaded question here.
Send it.
So, some of these partnerships, right? Marines coming to AFIT, the FRAS course, the weapons and tactics instructor course. What would you say to somebody that challenges those integrations because maybe they don't check a deployment readiness box? They're probably not reportable things. What's the value in it? Why prioritize it? Why spend the money on those partnerships? When it's obviously we're leaning into some of the soft skills, the integrations that we can't compartmentalize in a box. But what do you say to somebody that challenges, why we should be prioritizing partnerships like that?
Well, on the Marine Corps side, I will tell you because our commandant said so. Right, go out and look to do joint training with our sister services and also with our allies. So that's that. But it also increases combat readiness, right? Because there's lessons learned from each end that are going to be fruitful in order to increase combat readiness, right? And that's what we're here for: combat readiness. In the future, I definitely, looking at crystal ball, I can see in an area of conflict where there could be two firefighters that are Marines and two firefighters that are airmen on the same vehicle doing operations out in the middle of nowhere, right? Because there's a lot of crossover in transitions in and out of country, right? When you first get there, it's small, then it grows, and then it shrinks back as you're exiting. So during those transition times, I think it's going to be imperative that we understand how each other moves around in the battle space and be able to integrate seamlessly without increasing the risk of our customer, right? And our customer are those pilots or those folks that are in these living spaces and in those hangars. So that's how I will challenge that.
I feel like that's certainly a challenge for us. Like we recognize in the Air Force that like we need to develop decision-making ability and adaptability and a lot of these kind of soft skills in our people to be successful in the conflict that we're preparing for. And it's like our default is, well, what boxes do we need to check? CBTs do we need to accomplish to be green? Green equals deployment ready. And we all know that being green, checks and boxes, does not necessarily equal deployment ready.
Right.
But at the same time, right, we're a massive organization. We've got to have standards and rules and all the things. But, how do you quantify, adaptability, or how do you track things like resiliency and, all those things?
Yeah, it's tough staying in between the left and right boundaries of that, right? Like you said, there has to be standards and there has to be a direction, and at the end of the day, money's going to these things, right? So, that matters too, right? Well, why am I paying for this, right? Like if you're telling me, are you telling me it's a qualitative, like somebody's resiliency is more qualitative than quantitative, and when you start pushing money towards something like that, the questions start coming forward. So it's a great point. But fire rescue and survival is a perfect example of what you're explaining, though, right? I know you already said that, but so is what Chief Winkleman and some others are trying to stand up at the Fire Academy, which is FOSLIC is the acronym, Fire Officer Strategies and Tactics course, and there's been some roadblocks, but it seems to me like they're still pushing through and trying to break through some of those roadblocks, and that could come to fruition eventually. But that's another thing that you can't point to a certification. And you're talking about sending people up to 36 days, I think is how long the course is right now as it sits, or the concept of the course, and that's a long time and a lot of money. And so, like, what are my firefighters getting out of that? Or, what are these NCOs and airmen getting out of this? It's tough. It is tough. I can see both sides of it, but I'm on your side of it, Chris. 100%.
That FOSLIC's a great example where it's like, an incredibly valuable course. And so our default goes, well, do we need to make it a requirement for everybody? Is this now a box to check to be certified or something?
Well, yeah, it's a great point too, and the throughput, the Academy's throughput capacity, it's just not going to be able to send every NCO company officer to this thing, right? And what happens if a guy fails it? Are we saying that person can't be a company officer? Are we saying that person can't deploy as a part of a deployable combat wing and lead airmen at a forward operating site with 2 other airmen, 2 other firefighters? it's tough, man. Like where do you draw the lines? And but those are important questions. So that was a good question. I don't know that there's a good answer to it, but
Yeah, you can't put a number and you can't quantify that. It's just in time, it's going to be a feel good story one day. Like, hey, why did these airmen, or they really crushed this exercise or this actual real world event. In these difficult times in an austere environment. Well, they've been training really hard, and Foslick was one of these little things that they did, or Frass, etc. You need a the old saying goes, misery breeds camaraderie, right? When that camaraderie gets built, right, you develop a love for your brother and sister standing right next to you, and it's that you can't
quantify.
put a number on that, right? Because
Right.
you're doing it for them, and to accomplish the mission.
I think basic training is a good example of that. There's nothing. There's some things that are quantitative there, but that's another experience, right? For airmen, soldiers, Marines, sailors, you're just really going to suffer, to varying degrees, right? We're not, suffering as much in the Air Force as the Marine Corps is at boot camp, I would imagine. But again, that's just a collective suffering, just to indoctrinate you into the service.
That's right.
And you could
You're
really compare Frass and Foslick to that experience.
What
Now
I can,
it's just to get it to be sorry to interrupt you, Marco,
yeah, go
but
ahead, please.
to get it to an enduring state is the challenge,
Yeah.
and embedding it into a culture. And so we just got to keep pushing the message, pushing Frass. I guess the longer it stays around, the harder it is to want to take away, right? And of course, as long as it's adding value, which I believe it is.
Yeah, what I'd offer to the old guys in the room that are making these decisions as to yes or no. I tell Marines this all the time, right? When they are in their first 4 years in the Marine Corps, like I was like, listen, you're not gonna in 20 years, you are not gonna talk about you sitting in the day room watching, movies and playing video games and doing all the comfortable stuff in a controlled climate environment. No, you're gonna talk about those shitty experiences that you had throughout the Marine Corps with the people you did them with, right? That's what you're gonna talk about at a bar one day, or at a reunion. So I think that'll touch those folks really good. That like they'll think back, wow, yeah, my favorite times that I speak about all the time are the worst times that I had, because I was connected with people and we suffered together. So I don't know if that's a quantifiable thing, but that definitely touches you in the heart really well.
I've heard you say that we need Marines to do hard things.
Yep.
Why are you so passionate about that? Like what is the value in doing hard things?
Yeah, you build resiliency, right? You have everyone has their threshold of what they can endure, right? And the more that you push that team or that person in a difficult environment, it just helps them build their resiliency. And you add a little bit of chaos in their controlled chaos, right? That increases their decision making abilities, making them more resilient, obviously. And when we're in these tough situations at an emergency, etc., whether it's on an installation or it's out on a spoke or a node, or a CL, right? Like you have to make the decision, and those are great ways. Pushing people in a safe environment, right? In training environment is a really really good way to do it. And I think the Marine Corps has a lot of examples of doing those things. And so does the Army, right? If you look at, Band of Brothers and all those, you name it, movies with tough times, and how people get out of them. It's perfect examples. There's nothing new out there, right? Tough things make you stronger and mentally capable of dealing with those things in a chaotic environment.
Yeah, some of the most respected organizations, at least in the United States and across the world, like Navy SEALs, the United States Marine Corps, firefighters, right? Like some of the most respected groups of people. And what is the common thread there? They all endure or face tough challenges, right? Yeah, there's just a lot to be said about that. I think most would probably agree with that sentiment. Doing hard things is necessary.
That's right.
There's a quote that I like. it's credited to the Duke of Wellington. I don't know if he actually said it or not, but that no man fears to do that which he knows he does well. And I feel like a lot of times that gets applied at a tactical level. That's a good reason to stretch a hand line every shift, or a good reason, in contingency training to set up the tent and to get reps at the tactical things. But to me, it applies at like it applies at a strategic level as well, where you put people in tough situations and they start to identify with, I can solve complex problems, or I don't quit, or I make good decisions under stress. They start to identify with these more strategic, again, soft skills about themselves because of the hard thing that they've endured. And I feel like that's exactly what you're getting after with these partnerships. And, that's what comes to my mind when you say we need Marine firefighters to do hard things, not just for the sake of, of doing something tough, but because of what comes from the personal development that results from doing challenging things, coming out on the other side of it a better person than you were when you started.
That's right.
I love it.
And there's a biological connection to this, and I wrote this down. I was kind of hesitant to bring it up because I'm nowhere near a biologist, but I hear it all the time, and I care about the science of these things. But when you do hard things, you do challenging things, you're actually developing a part of your brain called the anterior mid-cingulate cortex, and the more that you develop it, the more you develop it through tough experiences, but the more cognitive control under pressure, the more attention you have, the better you are at decision making under pressure, right? So it's important. The point here is that it's important to consistently do these tough things. Don't wait until the call, right? Don't wait until you deploy. Consistently, day to day, do tough things so that you develop, the chemical, the biological framework within your body to be able to be ready for these moments. And FRAS is a way to develop that, right? Or the things that you do within FRAS, like those drills, pulling a hand line, putting on your mask within a certain time frame, going sleep out in the dirt. These are things that are hard that you need to consistently do so that you can develop that part of your brain to be ready for when you need it.
Absolutely. I think sets and reps, right? Like you said, Chris, earlier, your sets and reps, it's going to definitely hone it's going to connect the dots in your brain just to like get in your flow state, right? I've heard you talk about flow state, doing hard things, challenging things. Myself, at an older age, I'm not a department no more. I'm probably never going to put on gear again. But what I do for my personal readiness is I've been doing jiu-jitsu for many years. And that, again, it's hard. Every class is hard no matter how experienced you are, right? There's ways you can do things that you can do on the mat that are just going to challenge your skills and your abilities of problem solving, like on the fly, right? And I started jiu-jitsu probably about 6 months before I deployed to Iraq, and just those 6 months alone really helped me benefit my decision-making abilities, my resiliency, and leadership skills also when I was forward deployed, right? And that's testament exactly what you guys are talking about right now. Doing hard things really increases your ability to deal with tough situations.
Mm-hmm. And if you're listening to this and you're like, I don't know, there's nothing in my world that's hard day to day. Maybe you're sitting behind a computer, right? You go find those hard things. Fitness is a great example. And, I'll use an example for myself here. I'm out in the interior of Alaska, and I could easily find a treadmill at the gym, or get on the stationary bike. But lace up the shoes and get out in the sub-zero temperatures. And I'm saying within reason, right? Don't just get out with a t-shirt, some shorts. Be smart about it. Do some risk management. But you could go find hard things to do. You could absolutely do that, and just do it every day. That's. And I'm not saying running is for everybody, or running in the cold is for everybody. Maybe that's not what you want to do, but that's just an example. You can go find something. Marcos, anything else, I guess, related to the job, related to the Marine Corps, what you do in your position that you wanted to mention that you didn't?
So yeah, one thing is if anyone out there that's listening that's a civilian and wants to be a firefighter, the Marine Corps has created what's called a PEF code. I forget what the acronym stands for, but we have PEF codes to join the Marine Corps, and the firefighting is a standalone PEF code because before you would, if you wanted to be a Marine, you'd have to pick a PEF, but had many jobs that you could get depending on your aptitude scores on the ASVAB. But now, as of a year and 4 months ago, if you want to be a Marine firefighter, then you can walk into a recruiter's office and say, I want to be a Marine firefighter. As long as you meet those requirements, you can be one of us. But remember, we're Marines first. We're Marines first. It could be firefighters that are trained to be firefighters. And we talked about a lot of things during this podcast. Even then, you can do many other things other than firefighting when you're in the Marine Corps. But bottom line is we're Marines first. We could drop whatever we're doing, pick up a weapon, and set up a defense or start attacking the enemy. Right? That'll always take precedence in all things Marine that we're required to do. So that was a quick plug for that. For our having our own PEF, if you want to be a Marine firefighter. But again, Marine Corps always eats first, and that's what we do. We kill people.
I love it, man. What a way to end it, dude. That's awesome. Chris, any other questions you want to ask?
You know what? I'm not even going to try to follow
We kill
that
people.
ending. Yep, that was perfect.
Well, Master Gunnery Sergeant Martinez, I appreciate your time. It was a pleasure. It was awesome to hear about everything that you're doing, everything the Marine Corps is doing, and man, 28 years of service in the Marine Corps. We appreciate your service.
My pleasure.
Yeah, awesome. Have a good one, sir.
You too.
All
Have a good
right.
day.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Fire Dog Podcast. You can find more episodes like this on our website, firedog.us, or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're also on social media. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at the Fire Dog Podcast. That is the Fire DAWG Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and follow to stay updated on every new episode. We'd appreciate it if you'd share this podcast with your friends and coworkers, either on social media or right there within your firehouse. This is Matt Wilson and Chris Boykley with guest Master Gunnery Sergeant Marcos Martinez. Until next time, stay safe.